Hey everybody, welcome back to When Harry Met Board Games, where we feed our people with relatable content and our victory condition is your satisfaction. I am Harry and today we'll be having another top 10 video. Today I'll be covering the top 10 or my top 10 games that I have the most content for. These are not necessarily my favorite games, but you could imagine that because I have so much content for them, they cannot rank too poorly, right? So, without any further ado, let me explain a little bit of the criteria that I used. Basically, I didn't go on just sheer size. I did a combination of factors, like obviously size played in, like if the content occupies lots of size in my shelving, that's a factor that's very important. But also I factored in money, how much it costs. I factored in how many expansions, I have for each of these games. That's basically how you get the content. You buy expansions for these games. So I factored in all of that, the size, the cost, and just how much game do I have for these different respective games with all the content that I have. And I just want to make a quick, brief little honorable mention to my number 11, and that would be Agricola. I have a good amount of content for Agricola. I have, the Farmers of the Moor expansion, the 5 to 6 player expansion. I own, a bunch of the player decks that have been coming out lately in Essen. So I feel like I got a good amount of content for that, but not quite enough to make it into the top 10. So without any further ado, we will go to my number 10. And my number 10, because I'm only counting the actual original game and not the gaming system, it only falls into my number 10. If I would have counted the gaming system, it probably would have gone up a few spots, if not several. My number 10 is Pandemic, the popular, mega successful cooperative game that is very relevant to the times we are living in right now. This is a very highly ranked game on BoardGameGeek.com, a highly ranked game on my personal list of favorite games. Here in this box alone, I have the content. I have a bunch of the content for, actually I have pretty much all the content for the first expansion, which is On the Brink. And I have some of the content for the second expansion in the lab, and the remainder right here still in this box right here, the In the Lab expansion. And I have this unopened third expansion, State of Emergency, which I will open up sometime soon, hopefully. I am horrendous at getting games and expansions to the table as quickly as I purchase them. But yeah, so basically I have this base game and 3 expansions. And again, as I alluded to earlier, if I would count the fact that I own some legacy boxes, the fact that I own some other iterations of Pandemic, like Pandemic the Cure, Pandemic Iberia, Pandemic Rising Tides, if I would count all of these things, Pandemic would easily bump up 2 or 3 spots. But I'm only counting Pandemic proper and its 3 expansions, and because of that, it's my number 10. Now we move on to my number 9 game that I have the most content for, and that's this one here, one of my favorite games of all time, Cosmic Encounter, the classic from the late 70s that has seen so many reprints by so many companies, and finally the standard, truest copy of them all, the Fantasy Flight Edition that came out in 2008 and was, remade, I think, in 2018 or so, the 42nd, or was it 2019? The 42nd year anniversary edition. This is not the 42nd year anniversary edition, this is the 2008 edition, but this is a great game, negotiating, science fiction theme, variable, player powers, where this is basically innovative variable player powers. Such an innovative and influential game in the gaming hobby. And not only do I own this game, that if all I owned was this box, there are so many aliens in this box. And it has so many different decks. You have your regular encounter deck, and you have your destiny deck, and you have your technology deck, and your artifacts, and your what's it called? Your special powers. You know what I'm talking about. Those cards. The flare cards. You have your flare cards. If that was not enough, Fantasy Flight came out with 6 expansions. And I've opened up a few of the things in the first expansion here, Cosmic Incursion. I haven't even taken the shrink wrap off the other 5. so much content. I cannot ever exhaust the content of this game. And even so, it's only my number 9. So now we move on to my number 8 expansion. And it was pretty close between Cosmic Encounter and Seven Wonders. But I'm going to give the edge to Seven Wonders as far as being the number 8. Seven Wonders, that's my number 8. Because the content is a little bit bulkier than the content. In essence, most of Cosmic Encounter is just cards. Most of this is cards too, but there's also like the player boards. You know, you have different civilization boards to represent different, you know, cultural, historical civilizations. I own so much stuff for this game. Most of my content is right here in this box, because I did buy a special customizable insert for it all. And, you know, one of these days, you know, I've had a request to make videos that show some of my best storage solutions and my best customized insert options that I'm using. So that's something I'll do in the future. I'm not going to focus on that in this game right now, in this video. Right now, I'm just talking about the board games that I have the most content for. And in this box alone, not only do I have the base game, but I have the Leaders expansion, I have the Cities expansion, I have the Wonder Pack, I have the Babel expansion, right? And here, in a separate box, I have the Armada expansion. And I still need to get the anniversary packs. They have 7-year anniversary packs for both Cities and Leaders that I think add mostly new leaders, and I think maybe a few other cards that you could add to the deck and so on and so forth. And I am definitely going to get that soon. It's very affordable. I don't know why I haven't gotten it yet. But this is my number 8 game with most content, Seven Wonders. And now we move on to my number 7. And with my number 7, kind of like going back to Pandemic, if I would have not counted just the game and its content, if I would have counted the gaming system, this game would probably be my number 1 as far as most content is concerned. It would probably lead you to believe that this is my favorite game of all time, and it's not. I like it a lot, but it's not my favorite game of all time. So I'm just counting the gaming system proper. This one is the implementation that I have the most content for. I'm not counting all the rest of the system. And my number 7 is Memoir 44, the most popular and successful iteration of the Command and Colors system, simulating World War II combat. It's a 2-player game, hand management, dice rolling, recreates a bunch of different historical scenarios, you know, related to the war in World War II. You could tell that it was thoroughly researched, but at the same time, the gameplay is more about the mechanisms and the fun factor than it is about trying to be exactly true to history. There is a little bit of history there in the background, which I appreciate, but the gameplay allows you to not necessarily recreate those moments, but kind of like reinvent those moments and make them your own, and at the same time have a fun, enjoyable experience. Not only do I have 2 boxes of the base game so that I could truly play Overlord, where you combine 2 of the main boards and have this mega map and just play some of these mega multiplayer scenarios. There's still only 2 sides, you know, Axis versus Allies, but it can accommodate up to 4 against 4. And if you got a third board, I think you could do 6 against 6 or something along those lines. 4 against 4. Awesome. I only played Overlord once, unfortunately. I need to play it again, but that was a very fun and enjoyable experience. But regular Memoir 44, I've thrown it at the table tons of times. Here I also have, just within these 2 boxes, I have the Eastern Front expansion, and I also have the Terrain Pack, and they add a lot of different terrain tiles, different historical scenarios that you can add to the game. They also add different units. The Eastern Front adds some Russian units. And if that weren't enough, I also own the Winter Desert board, just in case you want to recreate some battles that were fought in either a snowfield or a desert, right? You have this board that you can play in. It's still in the shrink wrap. I haven't used it yet. And then I have the Pacific Theater expansion to simulate some of the battles in Japan. And you've got the Mediterranean theater right here. You also, I have the Winter Wars expansion. All of these are in the shrink wrap. And I have the Operation Overlord expansion. And if that were not enough, on top of all that, I have the new Flight Plan expansion here as well, which adds aerial or airplane battle into the game. Woo! Tons of content. I can't imagine myself ever exhausting it. I do really, really appreciate history. And even though, honestly speaking, as a fan of history and historian, World War II, believe it or not, is actually one of the battles that interests me less. Not because it doesn't have some fascinating historical, things that occurred, but just because I tend to lean towards history the more ancient it is, right? So the further back we go into antiquity, the more history tends to fascinate me. But even so, this is probably my favorite, if not top 2 iterations of the Command and Colors system, although I prefer the actual historical setting of many of the other versions of CNC, of Command and Colors. This is one of the best implementations gameplay wise. It feels smooth. It feels like it appeals to the broadest amount of people as far as having that ease of entry, right? It's not a very hard game. Some of the other Command and Color ancient games are a little bit more nuanced, a little bit more difficult to get into, but this one not so much. So yeah, that is my number 7 game with most content. And now we move on to my number 7 game that I own the most content for. And this one, again, if I were just counting size, bulk, physical space, this might contend for number 1, definitely top 2 or 3. But because it doesn't, I'm not just factoring in space, I'm factoring in money and just, again, the amount of expansions that I've invested into these games. Because of that, this game only falls as high as my number 6, but that's still pretty high. My number 6 game with most content is Descent. And this is a fantasy-themed dungeon crawler game. Very popular game published by Fantasy Flight. Love playing this game with my nephews and my niece. Play this game with my friend Andrew as well. If I had to make top 10 games that I most likely won't get through all the content for, this might be number 1. Let me just show you how much I have here for this game. So I have one right here, one expansion here. And here's a second expansion. And here's a third expansion. And here's a fourth expansion. And here's a fifth one right here. And here's a seventh one right here. And here is an eighth one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Well, actually, 7. I miscounted. I was counting the main box, the base game. 7 different expansions. And these are the 7 main expansions. All the 7 main expansions for the second edition of Descent: Journeys in the Dark. They do have about, 7 or 8 expansions that are like conversion expansions, which basically give you some of the monsters and the heroes that were available in the first edition of Descent, that because of the changes that were made in the gameplay, it required this kind of like conversion expansion where it gives you the cards and all the pieces and rules that you would need to use, transfer over those heroes, as well as their models, to transfer them over into Descent. So that's really, really cool. I am interested in those. And they even provide like 1 or 2 scenarios, one-off scenarios, that you can use those monsters and heroes in. They also have a few like small pack expansions. Here's another thing. I've bought a good amount. I think I bought all the lieutenants, the lieutenant packs that come in the base game, with the lieutenants that come in the base game. So that's 6 different lieutenants for their actual miniatures, because the base game has like little tokens to represent the lieutenants, which doesn't make sense because all you have is a whole bunch of, miniatures, and then you have one random token there. It looks bad. So it's a good way to make a little extra money for Fantasy Flight. So I bought those. They come with a couple special lieutenant pack cards that you can use for your overlord to make them stronger, and so on and so forth. But the point is they have some smaller expansions that include like solo ways of playing, or ways of playing without without an overlord, a human overlord, a human GM. But here's the thing. I know a lot of people like to play with the app and stuff like that, and that's really, really cool. And I definitely will eventually, you know, play with the app. I haven't yet. I'm kind of old school. I really like the analog experience, and I get it. It does it does the work of the overlord for you, which saves tons of time and tons of work, right? However, I think I'm going to invest in some of these smaller, you know, expansions that allow you to play solo or cooperatively without a human, you know, DM, a human overlord. And at the same time, just be able to engage in that experience. Because every time I play Descent, I have been the Overlord. I am curious about playing on the side of the heroes and just having a character and leveling them up and you know, just acquiring, you know, different tools and different skills, different equipment that will make him or her more powerful. Really, really cool. Really, really excited about that stuff. So there is still further content that I'm interested, but at the same time, like I said, this is top 10 games that I might not get to explore all the content because it's not everybody's cup of tea. Lots of the people that I game are more into Euro games, and don't get me wrong, I'm actually more into Euro games too. But I do appreciate the occasional Ameritrash game. But a lot of people that I game with aren't too fond of Ameritrash. So I have a select group of people that I do play these style of games with. So it decreases the chances that all this content will get played, right? But at the same time, I hope to play with these people and get these games to the table. I do have hopes, again, of playing solo, playing with the app. I do have a 4-year-old boy who one day will be old enough to play some of these games with me. So there's still hope for the future. But for now, I have lots of content for Descent, and I don't know when I'm going to get to it. That is my number 6 game with most content, Descent Journeys in the Dark. And now we move on to my number 5. My number 5. And again, this takes up way less space than Descent, thanks to an awesome, you know, box that the publishers came up with, so you can put all of the content within. So it takes up a lot less space, but monetarily, because of how many expansions I've bought and how many expansions there are, it just beats Descent for the time being. Remember, I still said there's other content for Descent that I'm still hoping to explore, and if I do get all that, Descent could quickly rise up the ranks and maybe one day overtake number 1. But for now, my number 5 game with most content is the DC deck building game. And you would think that this game would rank really high on my overall games of all time because it's number 5 in most content. However, it probably doesn't rank in my top 75, maybe it ranks in my top 75. If it ranks in my top 75, it's pushing it. I do like the game, don't get me wrong, but I've grown a little old on it. Now, here's the thing. I own almost everything. This is a heavy box here. I own almost everything. I am 2 boxes short. There's a small crossover pack that came out recently, Batman Ninja, something along those lines. And there was, of course, the Mega Rebirth box, which is kind of like a reimagining of DC deck building, including an additional currency, which I do think is neat because one of my biggest knocks on DC deck building has always been the fact that there's only one currency, and most of the deck builders that I tend to go for, that I gravitate towards, happen to have 2 or sometimes more currencies in them. And DC deck building created a new currency, which is like a move currency, and that's what DC deck building Rebirth introduces. You have actual physical locations, and some of the cards that you're drafting and, you know, adding to your deck are cards that have a movement currency, move 1 or move 2, and allows you to move around, you know, the different locations, which are basically just different spots where you can acquire cards, I guess. Again, I'm not too sure. I've not played it. I'm actually not too interested in it, even though I've heard some decent things, and a lot of people who already like DC deck building tend to like it even more. I'm not sure if it's going to make people who didn't like DC deck building like it, and not that I fall in that camp, but I think I'm not far enough in the I love DC deck building camp to warrant buying that, right? When I could buy some other games. I already feel like I have a lot of content. There's so much that I haven't gotten to. I've played a lot of the big stuff, but there's some of the smaller box expansions that I still haven't gotten to. So there's still a lot for me to explore here. If I ever get DC deck building Rebirth, time will tell. But for now, my number 5 board game with most content, the DC deck building game. And now my number 4 game with most content is none other than Rabbit. No, this can't be right. Sorry. My number 4 game with most content is none other than Marvel Legendary, the deck building game. And this box is heavy, in part because of the customizable insert here, and also in part because of all the cards that I have just in this box. Of course, I have the base game here. I also have the Dark City expansion here. I have the Secret Wars Volume 1 expansion here. I have the Painting the Town Red small expansion, the Fantastic Four smaller expansion, the Guardians of the Galaxy expansion, the Captain America 75th Anniversary expansion, the Deadpool expansion, are all the expansions that I have just in this box. Not to mention the fact that I have this Dark City box here, which again, my Dark City is actually in the main box, but here I have Secret Wars Volume 2, and I have Civil War are here, and again, this has a nice wooden insert inside. And here, still in its shrink wrap, I have Marvel Legendary Villains, and this is a big box with lots of content that allows you to play the Marvel Legendary deck building game, but from the opposite side, you are controlling the villains and you are trying to, accomplish your objectives or stop the heroes from, stopping you. So really cool perspective. Really excited about eventually getting this one to the table. So that's a lot right there. And on top of it all, I have this small little Champions expansion. This is what like the smaller expansions look like. They only have about 100 cards. But there's so much stuff for this game that I've given up on the idea of being able to keep up. I can't keep up. I mean, perhaps if you were in the hobby when this game first came out back in 2012, I was not. I started playing this game in 2016, 4 years too late. And I think I caught up quite a lot, but I just can't keep up. I mean, there's still the X-Men expansion, big box expansion that I don't have. There's the World War Hulk expansion, which I don't have. There's the Thor, Heroes of Asgard expansion, which just came out recently. There is the Ant-Man Wasp expansion, which I don't have. There's the Spider-Man Homecoming expansion, which I don't have. There's the Venom expansion that I don't have. They came up with like 2 other small box expansions recently that I also don't have. I do have the Fear Itself expansion. I didn't mention that earlier, which is a small expansion for the villains. So there's a lot of stuff I don't have. I do plan on getting the X-Men big box soon. That's like a must-have for me because I am big on X-Men. X-Men and Spider-Man are my 2 favorite properties within this universe of Marvel. So I would love to invest into that. But that might be the last big box I get. Even though I've heard great things about World War Hulk, I'm not too sure if I will invest in that. And I'm not sure they're going to continue. It doesn't sound, I haven't heard no announcements about a big box now. It seems like lately they've been focusing more on the smaller boxes, which is just fine because they have so much content. But if they did come out with more big boxes, I probably wouldn't invest. But there is so much money and material here. And not only that, but so much content as far as replayability, so much replayable content. Because if I had to factor in replayable content, this might be number 1. And DC deck building would be knocked down drastically because I do feel like DC deck building, while it has a lot of content, I feel like its content is less reusable and less replayable. That's just my personal opinion. Don't kill the messenger. But Marvel Legendary, I definitely think is very highly replayable in its content. And it's my number 4 game with most content. Now we move on to my number 3. And this could rival Marvel in its replayability. But for now, it outdoes it in overall content as far as what I have. Dominion. I have so much Dominion content. Again, another heavy box with a customized insert. So much content here in the Seaside game. This is where I keep most of the stuff that I'm currently using, which includes obviously the base game, some of the upgrade cards from the 2nd edition of Dominion, a few promos that I actually invested in, the what's it called? The Seaside expansion itself. The Prosperity expansion is here. I think I have the 4th expansion. What is it? Alchemy is here. I also have the 2nd expansion. Dominion Intrigue is here as well. I think I also have Cornucopia here, if I'm not mistaken. So I have a lot of stuff just in this box. And then on top of it all, I have another box here with a nice wooden insert, Dominion Prosperity box, where I keep a bunch of the others, Hinterlands and Dark Ages and what's the other one? Guilds and all that stuff is in here. And then, on top of it all, I have this Adventures box here. And I have this Empires box here. And I have this Nocturne box here. And now you can't see me. All right, so I've got so much stuff for Dominion. I love Dominion. It's one of my favorite games. I love the deck building genre. I've talked about that quite often on this channel. I think I am one expansion behind. I do not have the latest expansion, which came out last year or a year and a half ago, which was the Renaissance expansion, which I've heard really, really good things about it. I do not own Renaissance. It's definitely on the bucket list, on the wish list. It will be had. And they are coming out this year with Menagerie. And again, for me, I think that's a must-have. So it's interesting. What happens with Dominion that doesn't happen with Marvel is that I feel like the expansions tend to be more must-have for me. I can't even explain it because I'm a huge Marvel fan. But for whatever reason, I find them to be more... I feel like maybe because I feel like I could get to it. Like while Dominion is more replayable, I guess maybe it doesn't feel as infinitely replayable as Marvel, which has its pros and its cons. You know, it's great for gameplay, but at the end of the day, do I really need that many expansions for Marvel if the ones I have are already inexhaustible? Even though Dominion is kind of the same combination-wise, but yeah, for whatever reason, I do want to get Renaissance, and I do want to get myself Menagerie. They will eventually be in my collection. But for now, I have tons of content to work on or work through in Dominion, my number 3 game with most content. And now we're at my top 2 games with most content, that I own the most content for. And for my number 2, I am actually going to break my own rules, where I'm going to go with a game that can be looked at as a system of games, and I'm going to count all those games within the system towards that content. And my number 2 game with most content of all time is Carcassonne. First of all, I own 9 expansions for base vanilla Carcassonne. 9 expansions. And I have a good chunk of them right here. I think I have like the first 6 expansions. I combined them all just into this box. And then I have a couple other expansions here in this tower expansion box. And finally, I have this expansion here, Carcassonne Under the Big Top, which is the 10th expansion for Carcassonne. So none of these expansions in and of themselves are huge. None of them are enormous, right? It's a good amount of content, adds a lot of replayability to the game, but nothing overwhelming. However, Carcassonne has published, or I should say Klaus-Jürgen Wrede, and, you know, a couple other collaborators over the years, have published so many other iterations, right? Kind of spin-offs off the Carcassonne system with the same name, same basic mechanisms with a few different nuances and thematic wrinkles, but it's still basically Carcassonne. So I'm going to count it. And I have so many of those spin-offs because here in this house, I've said it before, we are a Carcassonne family. It is one of our favorite games. And because of its ease and its short gameplay, it is one of our most played games. And we've been playing this game forever. We actually played this game for the first time in 2014. Which, mind you, I would not consider myself a hobbyist back then. I was not a gamer, per se, in the fullest sense of that term, back in 2014, but I was already playing Carcassonne. So, what other iterations do I have? I have Carcassonne the Castle, which I just recently opened, and I'm hoping to get to the table. This has been a grail game for me so long. It's one of the few iterations of Carcassonne that was not actually designed by Klaus-Jürgen Wrede. This was actually designed by one of my favorite board game designers of all time, Rainer Knizia. It is out of print. I was able to get a brand new shrink wrap copy for a regular price. I basically paid Carcassonne price for this game. So I was so excited to get it. I also own Carcassonne Gold Rush, and my wife and I have had a blast playing this with a Wild West theme, you know, just that Gold Rush theme of, you know, digging for gold in the mountains and building railroads and so on and so forth. Really, really cool implementation. Also, the original, you know, spin-off of Carcassonne, Carcassonne Hunters and Gatherers. Not too big of a fan of the graphic design in this game, but I like the twist that it has. It feels more challenging and more, perhaps a little bit more of a thinking man or thinking woman's version of Carcassonne than the original version is. Like it, if it had a reprint with better graphic design, I probably would be a bigger fan, but it's still a great implementation. I also own Carcassonne Over Hill and Dale, which I have not played yet. Carcassonne Amazonas, which I also haven't played yet. And another Grail game for me, Carcassonne the City, which is also out of print. People are selling this for a ridiculous amount of money. And again, I was fortunate enough to get a brand new, still in shrink wrap copy for regular Carcassonne price. How lucky am I? And I actually bought this and Carcassonne the Castle like within a month of each other. So I am very, very fortunate. So I own all of this stuff. Not to mention, there's so many other iterations of Carcassonne that are on my wish list. Ark of the Covenant. I have Discovery, which I believe might be a design by Leo Colovini. I'm not too sure. And also South Seas. These are some of the iterations. Oh, and Safari. I'm interested in getting Carcassonne Safari. So there's a couple other, you know, spin-offs of Carcassonne that are still on my wish list that I will get. How much Carcassonne can you have? Here's the thing. We play so much Carcassonne in this house that it's okay. We're okay with that. So my number 2 game, I know I cheated. Let me have it in the comments down below. My number 2 game that I own the most content for is Carcassonne. And now we're going to get to my number 1. Have you guessed it? Can you guess it? Is it possible? The game that I own the most content for, money-wise, boxes-wise, content-wise, just space that it occupies-wise. My number 1 game with most content is Ticket to Ride. And right here I have my Ticket to Ride Europe box and my Ticket to Ride Nordic Countries box. And of course my Ticket to Ride Vanilla box. And in these 3 boxes, I keep most of the content that I'm currently using. I separate them by boards, by pieces, by cards. And I have the base game. Of course, I have Europe and Nordic countries like I showed you. But I also have maps for Asia in here. I have the maps for Africa in here. And I have the maps for India and or Switzerland in these boxes. Not to mention, I'm very excited about what they've been doing lately with these small spin-offs, shorter games with cities, focusing on cities rather than countries and continents. Ticket to Ride New York and Ticket to Ride London. Really, really cool, short filler versions of Ticket to Ride. And if that were not enough, then let's get to my unopened content. I own, of course, I have Ticket to Ride France right here. Woo! And this has another board. I believe it's for Pennsylvania. Or no, this is the Old West. Instead, my Ticket to Ride United Kingdom map here also comes with a Pennsylvania map inside of it. Then we have Ticket to Ride Netherlands right here. All right. And I have Ticket to Ride Germany. Ticket to Ride Germany. Then I know that this one has not been very popular among most people, but I have Ticket to Ride Rails and Sails. And this also has a Great Lakes map as well. So I like the idea about just dealing with the whole world and also dealing with sailing and ships and whatever it is that connects one continent to another. Really, really cool. And finally, the latest one that I just got recently, I showed off in a special delivery video not too long ago, Ticket to Ride Japan, which also has a Italy map. So much content here. Again, like Carcassonne, we are a Ticket to Ride family. I know it's a gateway game. I know it's not popular to like gateway games, but I do feel that these different boxes, these different expansions, they add a few little, wrinkles here and there to make you, try and implement different strategies. So I feel that I love the geography. I love geography. That's something I love. My wife loves to travel. So I'm not a huge fan of traveling, but I love geography. I love looking at maps and seeing how different places relate to one another and how far they are from one another. So we kind of both get fed in different ways from playing Ticket to Ride, her for her traveling and me for my love for geography. And I also just like the set collection, and I especially love the route connection. I love the mental exercise of trying to find a way to connect these routes more efficiently and quicker and better than your opponents, and fulfilling your destination tickets or your missions, if you will, successfully is a very rewarding feeling. So Ticket to Ride has been a great, staple in our household, in our gaming diet, and we've had a really, really good time. And again, it would probably get old if we were just playing the same map or the same 2 or 3 maps. That would make it old. But I do feel that every time we open up a new map, it's a new experience. First of all, just becoming oriented to the new geography, the new layout of the land, and learning a lot of these places that, honestly speaking, outside of North America, my geography is okay at best. But learning a lot of these cities and their towns and their names and how they, relate to one another, that's really, really cool. And again, just figuring out the slight subtle nuances that each different map introduces is a nice little challenge, and it adds some freshness to the game, at least for those first couple plays. And then we move on to another map. And I feel like there's enough maps that by the time, I go back to an older map and try playing that one a lot, it'll feel fresh to me again, right? And it makes for a great gateway game, great game to play with a lot of people, and also just a great game for people who are never going to become gamers. Because let's be real, the gateway drug is not going to work for everybody. You might introduce somebody to a gateway game. They might think it's cool, and that might be it for them. Let's just play that game. So it's a great game to have for that type of audience. Hey, let's play Ticket to Ride, right? It beats Monopoly, at least for me. So that's my number 1 game. Those are my top 10 games with most content. Thank you guys so much for watching. Comment down below. Tell me, what games do you own the most content for? Tell me what games you want to own more content for. Tell me which games you cannot believe I've invested so much into because, in your opinion, they're just not worth it. I just want to hear your opinions. Comment down below. Hit the like button down below. Subscribe to our channel if you're interested in some more board game related content. Again, this is Harry from When Harry Met Board Games saying take care, everybody. Have an amazing, safe week of gaming. Bye-bye.